The shaft was steep but not vertical, spiraling downward in a corkscrew pattern that reminded me, with a shudder, of the layered strata through which we had dug at Giza. The walls were smooth and featureless, composed of a material that seemed to absorb the light of my lamp rather than reflect it. And they were cold, so cold that I could feel the chill seeping through the leather of my suit, numbing my fingers and toes despite the insulation. I descended for what felt like hours, though my pocket watch, a faithful companion that had served me through campaigns in the Sudan and Afghanistan, showed that barely 20 minutes had elapsed. And then, without warning, the shaft ended. I did not emerge into darkness as I had expected. I emerged into light, a blue light, a sickly, electric cerulean luminescence that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, from the very air itself. I stood upon a ledge of some glossy basalt-like stone, and before me stretched a vista that shattered forever my conception of what lay beneath the surface of the earth. The city of Tsath spread out below me, the legendary Mound of Shinayan, and it was a nightmare of architecture that made the Cyclopean chamber in Egypt seem almost homely by comparison. Towers rose like the crooked fingers of a buried titan, their angles wrong in ways that made my eyes water and my brain ache. Bridges of iridescent metal spanned chasms of unknowable depth, and upon those bridges I could see movement, figures that might have been human from a distance, but that, I suspected, would reveal themselves to be something far more terrible upon closer inspection. The whole of this impossible metropolis was lit by a subterranean aurora that rippled across the cavern's ceiling like the northern lights rendered in shades of corpse glow and gangrene. My sapper's instruments were useless here. My compass spun in a frantic dance, its needle chasing phantom norths that seemed to multiply and shift with every passing moment. My barometer registered pressures that were incompatible with survival, and yet I breathed, the air inside my helmet tasting of copper and ozone, but sustaining my life nonetheless. I consulted the maps that Abbas had inscribed upon my consciousness, oriented myself by landmarks that existed in no cartography I had ever studied, and began my descent into the blue abyss. There was no sound in that eldritch city, and yet my mind was filled with a cacophony of telepathic screams, the cold, immortal boredom of a race that had outlived its own soul. The inhabitants of Tsath were not dead, I realized, but they were no longer truly alive. They had achieved the immortality that Abbas had promised me, but in doing so they had surrendered everything that made existence bearable. They moved through their basalt streets like automata, their faces fixed in expressions of perfect, eternal ennui. their eyes reflecting the same stagnant infinity that I now felt pressing upon my own heart. I saw them clearly as I descended, beings that had once been human, or something very like it, but that had been transformed by millennia of exposure to the Tulu metal and to the influence of the eye. Their skin had taken on a pearlescent quality, stretched tight over bones that seemed to have multiplied and rearranged themselves into configurations better suited for this subterranean existence. Some walked upon two legs. Others had adopted postures that reminded me of insects or crustaceans, their spines curved at impossible angles. All of them ignored me utterly, as though I were beneath their notice, a mayfly intruding upon a convention of immortals. And then I saw the centurions. They rode beasts that I can only describe as nightmares given flesh, quadrupeds whose bodies were covered in gleaming scales, but whose faces were horrifyingly, unmistakably human. These faces wore expressions of mindless terror, frozen in rictuses of eternal fear, and their eyes followed me with a desperate, pleading intelligence that contrasted horribly with the bestial forms to which they were attached. The centurions themselves were armored in that same iridescent metal that formed the bridges and spires of the city, and they carried weapons that resembled tuning forks more than swords, devices that hummed with contained frequencies, that promised death not through impact, but through resonance. They did not challenge me. They merely watched, their eyes reflecting the blue aurora with a flatness that spoke of duties performed so many times that they had lost all meaning. They were guards without purpose, soldiers without war, enforcers of laws that no one bothered to break anymore because everyone had forgotten why the laws existed in the first place. I pressed on, following the mental map that Abbas had burned into my consciousness, winding through streets that defied conventional geometry, crossing plazas where fountains burbled with liquid that was not water, ascending stairways that seemed to lead both up and down simultaneously. And at last I reached my destination, the Temple of the Golden Tears. It was then, as I traversed a descending causeway of that glossy basalt which passed for pavement in Tsath, that I beheld the labor of the city. Below me, upon a series of terraced galleries cut into the cavern's living stone, moved ranks of workers engaged in the harvesting of the accursed substance Abbas had named Tulu metal. The radiant metal did not lie in veins as earthly ores do, but flowed in narrow channels of controlled brilliance, guided through troughs of black mineral toward vast cisterns whose surfaces shimmered like oil upon dark water. The laborers tended these channels with mechanical diligence, and each of them was enclosed within a suit. For several moments I observed them with no particular alarm, for the spectacle of their industry seemed merely another grotesque feature of that buried civilization. Yet the sapper's instinct, trained through years of surveying bridges, engines, and artillery, does not long ignore repetition of form. There was a regulator upon the chest, a pair of articulated valves at the collar, segmented joints reinforced at knee and elbow, a reservoir fixed along the spine. The pattern struck me first as coincidence, then as familiarity, then, with a sudden and most chilling clarity, as identity. The suits worn by those silent laborers were not merely similar to my own. They were the same. I stood motionless upon the causeway and watched them more closely. And now that I knew what to seek, the deeper horror revealed itself. These were not men wearing garments. The suits had become their flesh. Where brass collars met the neck, there existed no seam nor fastening, but a pale organic junction, as though metal had been permitted, over centuries, to root itself within living tissue. The hoses which ran from reservoir to regulator did not terminate at valves, but vanished beneath translucent skin along the ribs and spine. Through certain of the clouded faceplates, I glimpsed not features but impressions, vague pressures against the glass where once a human countenance might have rested. Their hands were no longer hands. Each had become an implement suited to the guidance of the golden flow, narrow, jointed appendages whose motions were tireless and precise, tending the channels of Tulu metal as one might tend irrigation ditches in some blighted agricultural province of the damned. And none of them looked at me. None paused. None signaled alarm. They moved about their terrible duties with the serene indifference one might extend toward a passing cart or drifting shadow. For at last I understood. Abbas had not constructed my diving suit for the sake of protection. He had given me the shell of a laborer. To the citizens of Tsath, I was no visitor, no trespasser, no man at all. I was merely another instrument of the harvest. The Tulu metal was here. I could feel it before I saw it, a presence in my mind, a weight upon my soul, a warmth that spread through my chilled limbs and promised succor and renewal and eternal life. The temple was a ziggurat of impossible proportions, its stepped sides carved with bas-reliefs that depicted the history of Tsath, from its founding to its present state of decadent stagnation. I climbed those steps with legs that trembled from exhaustion and fear, and at the summit, I found what I had come for. A pool of liquid gold lay before me, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, its surface mirror smooth and perfectly still. It was not gold in the sense of the metal that men coveted and killed for. It was gold in the sense of light made manifest, of sunfire distilled and condensed into a state that was neither solid nor liquid, but something in between. It glowed with its own inner luminescence, and in its depths I could see things moving, shapes that might have been reflections of my own form, or that might have been the shadows of entities watching from some adjacent dimension. I produced the vessel that Abbas had provided, a flask of dark crystal, etched with glyphs that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed peripherally. and I knelt at the pool's edge. The metal called to me. It whispered promises of Clara restored, of a life without end, of powers that would make me the equal of kings and emperors. All I had to do was fill the flask and return to Giza, and everything I had lost would be returned to me 1,000-fold. But as I reached toward that seductive surface, I saw something in the depths of the pool that gave me pause. It was a face, not Clara's face, not Abbas's face, but my own. My face as it would be in 1,000 years, in 10,000 years, bleached and hollow, the eyes gone flat with that same stagnant eternity I had seen in the citizens of Tsath. I saw myself wandering these blue-lit streets forever, stripped of purpose, stripped of love, stripped of everything that made existence worth enduring. I saw what Abbas had truly offered me, and I understood at last the nature of the bargain I had been invited to make. I have filled the flask. God help me, I have filled it anyway. I have filled the flask. God help me, I have filled it anyway. Perhaps I tell myself that I can use the Tulu metal without succumbing to its influence. Perhaps I tell myself that I will employ it only to heal Clara, and then I will seal it away, never to be touched again. Perhaps I tell myself 1,000 pretty lies to make the truth of my damnation more bearable. But the truth is simpler and more terrible. I am weak, and I am desperate, and I cannot face a world in which Clara is gone, and I am alone with my grief. I stand now upon the summit of the Temple of the Golden Tears, the crystal flask heavy in my hand, and I feel the gaze of the eye upon me even here. Even across the thousands of miles that separate this blue abyss from the obsidian chamber beneath Giza. It is watching. It has always been watching. And I understand now that Abbas did not send me here to be a savior. He sent me to be a vessel. The eye of Yog-Sothoth has opened upon the world, and it hungers for sight. The Tulu metal will feed that hunger, will fuel a vision that will pierce the veils between all dimensions and all times. And I, Silas Vane, sapper, man of lever and pulley and gauge, I will be the instrument of that terrible awakening. I have become, in my desperation to save one life, the agent of an apocalypse that will dwarf all the nightmares ever dreamed by mortal minds. The centurions are gathering below. The citizens of Tsath have stirred from their eternal torpor, their flat eyes now alive with something that might be hunger or might be hope. They sense the change that is coming, the shift in the cosmic order that my actions have set in motion. And above it all, shimmering through the blue aurora like a promise and a threat, I can see the ghostly outline of the eye, watching, waiting, growing stronger with every heartbeat that passes. I am but a man of iron and ink, lost in the blue halls of the undying. And somewhere above me, in a world that seems more dreamlike with every passing moment, Clara lies dying in a London bed, unaware that her husband has damned himself, and perhaps all of humanity, in a futile attempt to save her. The flask grows warm in my hand, and I fancy I can hear whispers emanating from its crystalline depths, voices speaking in languages that were old when the stars were young, promising me wonders and horrors beyond the capacity of mortal imagination. The citizens of Tsath are ascending the steps of the temple now, their movements no longer languid but purposeful, their eyes fixed upon me with an intensity that speaks of need long suppressed, and now, at last, on the verge of satisfaction. They want what I carry. They want to feel the eyes gaze upon them once more, to be reminded that existence has meaning, even if that meaning is terrible beyond comprehension. And I find, to my horror, that I understand them. I understand the hunger that drives them, the desperate need to be witnessed by something greater than oneself, to know that one's sufferings and struggles are observed by a consciousness vast enough to lend them significance. The eye offers that. The eye offers everything, and in offering everything, it demands everything in return. The eye is patient. The eye is eternal. And I have looked into its depths, and I have seen the end of all things, not in fire, not in ice, but in the cold, indifferent gaze of a god that has watched civilizations rise and fall like foam upon an infinite sea, and that will watch ours do the same, with neither grief nor satisfaction, but only the perfect, terrible attention of absolute awareness. God forgive me. God forgive us all. I heard it between one heartbeat and the next, a sound so commonplace that it seemed almost obscene within that unhallowed place. A meow, soft, almost conversational, the sort of utterance by which a small creature announces its presence not from need, but from a curious courtesy. The cat was behind me. It sat upon the exact center of the temple's highest step, its tortoiseshell coat catching the wavering cerulean aurora in hues that had no rightful claim to beauty in such a place. I had not seen it since my descent into the shaft. Indeed, I realized now, with the cold clarity of a sapper's trained mind, that I had persuaded myself it had never made the passage at all, that it had been but a projection of a mind beleaguered beyond endurance, an emotional contrivance fashioned by my own subconscious to prevent its utter disintegration. Yet there it sat, real as the basalt beneath my boots, real as the crystal flask which weighed so terribly in my hand. It looked at me, and the manner of that regard was profoundly wrong. There was none of the bright, vacant alertness with which animals follow motion or scent. Instead, there was something patient, measured, like the attention of an intelligence that had long awaited the precise instant at which I might become capable of hearing what it had to impart. What followed did not pass through my ears. It came rather as certainty comes, not as sound nor as vision, but as a knowledge that has always existed and has merely now been permitted to rise to the surface. It was as though the creature had transmitted nothing new at all, but had merely withdrawn a hand which had long pressed against a hidden door. The first thing I knew was Clara. Not her voice, not her face, but the essential fact of her, the weight of her presence in the world. And beside that fact, quiet and irrefutable as geometry, she is already gone, Silas. She was gone before ever you reached the sands of Giza. Every vision Abbas placed before you, every restored cheek, every brightened eye, every imagined morning in Whitechapel was painted upon the inner walls of your grief. He did not create your hope. He merely found it burning and warmed his hands at its flame. I sank down upon the temple step. Whether the act was voluntary, I cannot say. It seemed rather that my legs had reached a decision which my mind had not yet ratified. The cat moved nearer and pressed its small warmth against my leg through the leather of the diving suit. I fixed my attention upon that simple physical fact, the weight, the warmth, the unmistakable presence of living flesh in that alien abyss, while the knowledge continued its slow, inexorable arrival. You are not within your own time, Silas. You have not been since Egypt. The fold through which Abbas cast you does not return. This place is no negotiation with that truth. It is the truth itself. You are the single fixed point within a void he has furnished with your desires, and he may accomplish nothing, nothing whatsoever, without your willing hand. He cannot take what you do not give. That is the nature of what he is. That is the single thread the darkness has left unsevered. He requires my consent, I murmured. The cat's eyes did not waver. Yes. I looked down at the flask. Within it, the Tulu metal stirred like something dreaming. I thought then of Abbas, of the thing which had worn Abbas's face, of the immeasurable patience that lurked behind those two wide eyes, of a design so ancient and so vast that individual human lives were no more to it than drifting weather. And I understood what I had been within that design. A door, a carefully fashioned door, constructed from one man's love for one woman, opened by grief and held wide by hope. Clara was gone, the hope was gone, but Abbas did not yet know that. He believes I still require something of him, I said slowly. Yes, and that belief is the only architecture remaining to us. Give him the flask. Walk the path he has laid before you. Be precisely what he expects. And you? There followed a pause, Not hesitation, but deliberation. The pause of something weighing how much truth might safely be given. We shall watch. We have watched longer than your civilization has endured. When the moment arrives, and you will know it, Silas, for it shall feel like the end of all things, you will not stand alone. Who are you? The cat turned its gaze upward toward the aurora that rippled across the cavern's distant vault, toward that cold, spectral light which illuminated all things and warmed none. Something older than Abbas's design, something which has already read the final page of this tale and has returned to ensure that it concludes correctly. It said nothing further. I rose from the temple step. I tested the seal of the flask with the automatic precision of a man long accustomed to trusting his life to the soundness of his equipment. I oriented myself by the mental chart Abbas had burned into my memory, and then I began the descent toward the blue streets of Tsath. My grief was clean now, scoured utterly. The desperate, grasping thing Abbas had fed upon was gone. In its place remained something quieter, harder, infinitely more useful. Purpose. Abbas desired a willing man carrying a flask of Tulu metal. He would receive exactly that. What he would not receive was the man he believed he had broken.